Hello everyone and welcome to the dp.DesignProfessionals YouTube channel. Today I will be talking about what to study for the Programming and Analysis exam of the ARE 5.0. Before we get into the content, I just want to say a little bit about myself. My name is Davina and I have passed all divisions of the ARE 5.0. I am a licensed architect in California, and I was able to pass my first ARE exam with just under 2 years of professional experience. And the entire licensing process, at least just for the AREs, took me about a year. For the most part, I was taking one exam per month until it came to the PDD and PPD exams. But I'll explain kind of what happened for those exams in the next videos. But this is just to show you that you don't need a lot of experience to pass the exams, and it doesn't have to consume your entire life. You can get these exams over with pretty quickly and become a licensed architect. Now to get into the content. The first place that you always want to start is with the NCARB ARE Handbook. This will always be your primary resource for any exam and should always be the first place you start at before studying for an exam. An important thing to note is you should always make sure you have the most recent version of the handbook, and you can find that on the first page in the bottom corner down here, or within the handbook at the top of the page up here. This particular version we are looking at is from December 2020, but you can click a link down below to make sure you have the most recent version, or you can just Google it, ARE NCARB Handbook, and it should pop up. It's important to get the most recent one because every couple of months, NCARB does update it with either new resources, new rules, or if they've updated the exam format, like in recent months, rolling out the online version of the exam. So it's important to make sure you have an up-to-date version. So today we will be focusing on the Programming and Analysis exam. So we'll go to that section. And the section we will be focusing on is the references page because we want to know what references to study. Definitely take a look at the other sections just so you know what the exam is about and what content you should focus on when you are reading through the materials. So I've highlighted a couple items here on the references page. These are the publications and codes and AIA contracts that NCARB recommends to study for this exam. For this exam, there are no AIA contracts and there are a few codes. I am recommending the Site Planning and Design Handbook as a primary resource and then Architectural Graphic Standards as a kind of secondary resource. I personally did not read Architectural Graphic Standards that much for this exam and I was able to pass, but definitely Site Planning and Design was a primary resource. As far as the codes go, codes are huge books that are unreasonable to read front to back. So I would know the codes, but I would not go out and purchase these or read through them front to back. There are other better resources that you can kind of get the gist of the material from in a much easier format. And I'll talk about those later in the video. So one of the first sources I'm recommending is the Site Planning and Design Handbook. Don't read through the entire book, just focus on a couple chapters. And this will help you focus your energy and your studies on only the content that is important and that matters for this exam. So I've highlighted here the chapters and the Appendix A that you should focus on, and then anytime it mentions brownfield remediation or environmental site assessment, pay special attention to those sections. For this exam, anytime the content or references books mentions anything having to do with placing a building on a site or orienting the building on a site. Those are things that you should definitely pay attention to. There's a couple different methods to do this, and there will be several books and diagrams that will explain kind of these different topics. So pay close attention to those diagrams and those topics. The next resource I'm recommending, this was like the kind of secondary one, the Architectural Graphics Standards. Like I said before, I did not really read through this that much for this exam, but it is a great resource nonetheless. It does a great job of explaining and diagramming out the basic details, the basic concepts, in a very graphic way. And as architects, I feel like most of us are visual learners. So this particular book does a great job of explaining everything with really clean graphics. This book, again, is not an absolute necessary resource, but I am including it in there just because it's on that NCARB Handbook page of references. If you do go through this book, I have highlighted some chapters that you should focus on. These are the kind of categories of information you should focus on. Just read through the table of contents to figure out where that information might be, or use this book to brush up on topics that you need help on once you've gone through the other materials. So moving on to secondary resources, these are books and references that were not mentioned on that references page for the PA portion of the handbook, but these will definitely help you understand the content and digest it in a more manageable way. So the first one is Building Code Illustrated. That's this book here. Make sure you have the correct version. This version is the 6th edition, and it's referencing the 2018 International Building Code. So if you go back to the ARE handbook, you'll notice that the code that it's referencing is the 2018 IBC. And so this particular version of Building Codes Illustrated is for that version. So make sure you have the most up-to-date one in accordance with whatever the NCARB handbook is recommending. Again, for this book, you do not have to read the entire thing. I have highlighted up here the particular chapters you should focus on, and that'll really help you save time and focus your learning efforts. This is the book I'm recommending, so you don't have to go through and read every single page of the code. This will help break down the concepts really well, really easily for you to understand. The next secondary resource I'm recommending is Sun, Wind, and Light. That's this one over here. Don't read through the whole thing. The part that I'm recommending is part 4, which is the favorite design strategies condensed. This particular section of the book does a really great job of diagramming some of the complex concepts, and I found that really helpful to understand the kind of sustainable concepts and site concepts that the exam covers. So you might be wondering where I got these secondary resource recommendations from. And actually, if you go to the very end of the NCARB handbook, there is a section called ARE 5.0 Reference Matrix. And what NCARB is saying here is that these items listed in the reference matrix are frequently used in the development of items for each division of the ARE. And what they're saying here is that they've used these reference books, reference materials, in order to develop test questions. So alarm bells should be going off in your head. This is super important. So if you read through them, it's very likely that you will find the answers to the test questions in these materials. As you can see here, for the PA exam, there are a lot of references listed. This is only 2 pages of the reference matrix, and it's actually a lot longer than just this. But in my opinion, the best resources in this matrix, besides the primary one that I had mentioned before, is Building Codes Illustrated and Sun, Wind, and Light. So my recommendations are not coming out of thin air. They're actually here recommended, referenced in the reference matrix. This is also a great place to look if you are struggling to understand certain ideas or concepts, and you need another source to try to explain it to you or help you understand it better. Come to the reference matrix and skim through some of these reference materials to see if maybe there's another book or reference material that can help you explain things better. By no means do you have to read every single one of the reference books listed here. It's just noting that these are some of the resources that are used in order to create exam content. So they are a good place to start. Moving on to third-party resources. As always, the two third-party resources I'm recommending are Ballast and Brightwood. As I've said before, Ballast is kind of a general overview, and Brightwood goes a little bit more in depth. When I was studying for the exams, the Ballast review manual was on their first edition of the ARE 5.0 study guide, and since then they've come out with a second edition. So I'm sure the second edition is better than the first. But the great thing about Ballast is they have not only a study guide, but they also have practice exams, practice questions, and flashcards. For me, one of the most important things was the practice exams and practice questions. I use those as a gauge to kind of understand my level of understanding of the exam content and figure out what topics I needed to brush up on more or learn more about with other reference books. I would like to note, if you are studying from the first edition study guide, besides reading the PA chapters of the study guide, also tack on chapters 12 and 13. Those chapters are not included in the PA section of the study guide, but those concepts and topics that are covered in 12 and 13 are definitely used in the PA exam. So definitely make sure you read chapters 12 and 13 if you're studying from Ballast first edition. Another thing to note for the Ballast review practice exam, if you are able to score at or around 50% or more on the practice exam, you should be able to pass the actual exam. In general, the Ballast practice questions difficulty level is pretty similar to the actual exam. You can use the practice exam as a guide or gauge to see how close you are to being able to pass the actual exam. That 50% range I know is a little low, but I've had a lot of friends go through this process using the first edition Ballast practice exams, and that number held pretty close to true 99% of the time. That's a number I'm making up, but it was very, very likely that you will be able to pass the exam if you're able to score around 50% on that practice exam. So just something to keep in mind if you are studying from the first edition. If someone is studying from the second edition, please drop a comment down below and let me know what your kind of score range was when taking that practice exam. I'd like to know if that number holds true still or if that range has changed. So to give a general recap, always start with the NCARB ARE Handbook as your primary study source. From there, look at other materials that they recommend in the references portion of the exam handbook. For the PA exam, that's going to be Site Planning and Design Handbook and Architectural Graphic Standards. I particularly am recommending the Site Planning and Design Handbook, Building Codes Illustrated, and Sun, Wind, and Light. Again, don't read the entire book. Don't read every single page of any of those reference books. Just read the chapters that I highlighted, or you can even reference the ARE 5.0 community to see what other people recommend. But in general, the chapters I recommend are pretty standard recommendations on the community. Then after that, third-party resources. Never rely solely on third-party resources to pass the exams. I made that mistake early on in my studying for the exams, and it did not work. You really need to focus on the content that is in the ARE 5.0 handbook. So in this case, Site Planning and Design Handbook, Building Code Illustrated, Sun, Wind, and Light, and maybe Architectural Graphic Standards. primary, secondary resources are your best bet to understanding the concepts and really understanding the level of detail that NCARB wants you to know and understand. So a couple extras, I like to recommend Quizlet, which is a free flashcard app and web-based program. Here you can search in there ARE 5.0 programming and analysis, and a bunch of flashcard sets will come up. It's basically public flashcard sets that other people have made. So if you can see in the screenshot here, some of these flashcard sets have over 270 terms. So it really helps you save time by not having to make all of those flashcards yourself. And you can use the flashcards on the app or on the web-based version to quiz yourself, practice the concepts. I use the Quizlet app when I was commuting to and from work every day, and it was a great way to just passively study on the train, or to kind of study on the couch if I didn't want to sit in front of a desk or in front of a computer screen to study. Besides just flashcards, they also have these games built in. So if you want to change up your kind of study routine or the way you're studying or the way the information is presented to you to see if you really understand the concepts, Quizlet does a great job of integrating different features into their program. The other resource I'm recommending is Designer Hacks, and they have a free and paid version. I found the practice exams on Designer Hacks particularly helpful, and I use that kind of in my last weekend of studying. Typically, I would take additional practice exams to really get my mind in that test-taking mindset and to get used to eliminating answers and narrowing down which ones are the best. So if you are looking for additional practice exams to take, I definitely recommend Designer Hacks, just because they have a free version and their paid version is not that expensive. So after going all of those study materials and reference books, here is a sample study schedule that I used in order to pass the exam in about a month. My typical way I took these exams or studied for these exams is I started off with Ballast, because that was kind of a general overview of the content, and it kind of dipped my toes in the water of understanding the scope of the exam and the different topics the exam covers. Then after that, I would go through Brightwood, which went a little bit more in depth than Ballast. Then from there, I went into the primary resources and reference books. So in this case, week 3, I would focus on Site Planning and Design Handbook, only reading those chapters that I highlighted previously in the video. And then week 4, I would go through Architectural Graphic Standards. Again, that one's not completely necessary, but if you want to read it and go through a couple of those chapters, now would be the time. And then Building Code Illustrated. Depending on your level of experience in the professional environment and your exposure to code and code references, give yourself more or less time to study code just based on your exposure to code in the workforce. But Building Code Illustrated does a great job of explaining and drawing out those code concepts. Week 4 would be your week to do Architectural Graphic Standards and or Building Code Illustrated, or maybe only Building Code Illustrated, depending on your time you have left. And then typically 2 weekends before my exam day, I would take the Ballast practice test and do a review of the practice test. The Ballast practice exam and Ballast practice questions do a great job of explaining in the answer key the questions and answers of why certain ones are correct and why certain ones aren't. I've said this multiple times. The Ballast answer key is a great resource, not only for understanding the practice exam, but also just as a study tool, because sometimes they cover material in the answer key that's not actually covered in their review manual. So definitely, if you're taking the practice test, take time to go through the answer key and really understand why each answer is the correct answer and why certain other options are not. Also, reviewing the practice exam helps you understand the concepts or topic areas that you need to still brush up on or understand better and that'll help guide your studies in the last week. So in week 5, I would typically start by reviewing anything that I did not understand that well based on my practice exam, and then go into reviewing of just everything to make sure I understand all of the concepts that I needed to before exam day. And then the weekend before my exam, I would do more Ballast practice questions, or maybe do a designer hacks practice exam. Again, reviewing everything that I still need to brush up on, or reviewing just general concepts. Typically, if there was anything that I needed to memorize before the exam, such as CSI master format, if I would memorize that in the last weekend before my test, just so it stays fresh in my mind and I don't forget it. And then I would typically take my test on a Monday, just so I had 2 full days before exam day to cram in information and get my mind in that test-taking mindset and really focus on the content without having to worry about work or any other commitments. So, to my favorite part, today's dog of the day is Han. And Han is a fluffy corgi. He is named after Han Solo because he is so low to the ground. Here are some fun facts about him. I won't read through all of them, but these are all pretty good. He is the unofficial official mascot of Corrigan, and he has coined the phrase Corrigan Corgi. If you want to see more content from him, you can check out his Instagram at Han_Solo_the Corgi. And I'll place the link down below so you can check it out more.
Fight on.
Here's his special talent, Fight On.
Good
Super
boy.
cute for all you USC Trojan fans and graduates out there. If you would like your dog or pet featured in a future video, feel free to send me an email at dp.designprof@gmail.com. My email is down here. Just send me a few pictures and or videos and a few fun facts about your dog or pet. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. It really helps me continue to make these videos. If you have any ideas or suggestions for future videos that you would like to see, please comment down below and I'll be sure to add them to my list for future videos. If I get enough comments about a certain topic, I'll scoot those up higher on the list. And with that, thank you all for watching. See you all next time.